A transatlantic flight becomes a pressure cooker at 35,000 feet. A man blinded by prejudice demands a black nurse move from her seat simply because of her skin color. He belittles her questions her profession and creates a scene for the entire cabin to witness. But when the cabin lights dim and a sudden medical crisis strikes his own family, the very woman he scorned becomes his only hope. This isn't just a story about a mid-air emergency. It's a harrowing account of arrogance confronted by expertise and hatred being humbled by the very compassion it tried to reject. What happens next is a lesson in karma so profound it will stay with you long after you hear it. The recycled air of the Boeing 777 hummed with the familiar drone of a long-haul flight. A white noise symphony of powerful engines and ventilation systems. For Olivia Bennett, a pediatric cardiac nurse with over a decade of experience at Johns Hopkins, it was a sound that usually signaled the start of a well-deserved vacation. This time it was a trip to London for a medical conference, a chance to connect with peers and learn about the latest advancements in her field. She settled into her window seat, 24A, the plush cushioning a welcome relief after the chaotic rush through Baltimore-Washington International Airport. The prospect of 7 hours with her noise-cancelling headphones, a good book, and the endless blue of the Atlantic outside her window was pure bliss. She had specifically chosen this seat months in advance. It was in the premium economy section, a necessary splurge. The extra legroom was a godsend for her 5'10" frame, and being by the window allowed her a small illusion of personal space, a buffer against the inevitable shuffling and bumping of the main aisle. She watched the ground crew scurry below like ants, their fluorescent vests bright against the grey tarmac. The pre-flight dance was a familiar one, a choreography of logistics and safety checks that she found oddly comforting. The boarding process was nearing its end when a family of 3 made their way down the aisle. Their progress impeded by bulky carry-ons and the general awkwardness of navigating a narrow space, the man leading them tall and broad-shouldered with a sweep of sandy blonde hair and a jawline that seemed permanently set in a discontented clench, stopped abruptly beside her row. He wore a crisp, expensive-looking polo shirt and tailored chinos, a uniform of casual wealth. He consulted his ticket, then glared at the seat number above Olivia's head, then at Olivia herself. A flicker of something cold and dismissive crossed his face. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying an imperious tone that grated on Olivia's nerves instantly. "I believe you're in our seats." Olivia momentarily pulled from her reverie, offered a polite but weary smile. "I don't think so. I'm in 24A. She held up her boarding pass for him to see. The woman behind him, presumably his wife, gave Olivia a fleeting apologetic glance. She was elegantly dressed but seemed to shrink under her husband's assertive presence, her hand nervously clutching that of a small girl no older than 6 whose bright, curious eyes were fixed on the tiny window. The man whose name Olivia would soon learn was Richard Carlson. Barely glanced at her pass. "We have 24B and 24C. My wife and daughter," he gestured dismissively. "We need the whole row." Olivia's polite smile tightened. "Well, this is 24A, which is my assigned seat. 24B and C are right there." She pointed to the 2 empty seats beside her. Richard's nostrils flared. "I'm aware of how seat numbers work," he snapped. "The point is, we booked these seats together. We're a family. We require the entire row for our comfort and convenience." He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact as if his desire was a law of physics. "I understand that, sir," Olivia said, her voice remaining steady and professional, the same tone she used with anxious parents in the ICU. "But the airline also assigned me this seat. Perhaps there's an empty row somewhere else you could move to. You could speak with a flight attendant. The suggestion seemed to offend him on a fundamental level. I'm not moving. We paid a premium for these specific seats. You, however... He paused, and his eyes did a slow, deliberate sweep over her from her intricate braids to her dark skin, lingering for a moment, as if he were assessing livestock. The implication was as clear as it was ugly. You could probably find a more suitable seat elsewhere, maybe in the back. The thinly veiled racism hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't the first time Olivia had encountered it, but its casual public delivery still managed to send a jolt of anger and exhaustion through her. She saw the flash of embarrassment on his wife's face, and the way she gently pulled their daughter closer, trying to shield her. "My seat is perfectly suitable, thank you," Olivia replied, her voice now edged with a cold firmness. She turned her body squarely towards the window, a clear, non-verbal dismissal. She would not be intimidated. She had earned this seat, paid for it, with her own money, and deserved to sit in it as much as anyone else. The final boarding call echoed through the cabin. A flight attendant, a kind-faced woman named Maria, with a warm smile, bustled towards them. "Is there a problem here, sir?" she asked, her eyes darting between Richard's furious expression and Olivia's stony profile. "Yes, there's a problem," Richard boomed, seizing the new audience. "This woman is refusing to move from our family's row. We need her to switch seats, so my daughter can have the window." It was a blatant lie, a reframing of his demand to make Olivia seem unreasonable. His daughter hadn't expressed any interest in the window. She was quietly playing with a small teddy bear, oblivious to the rising tension. Maria looked at Olivia, who simply held up her boarding pass again. "My boarding pass says 24A window seat." Maria nodded, her professional smile unwavering, but her eyes conveying a deep sense of understanding and support to Olivia. "I see," she said, turning back to Richard. "Sir, this is Ms. Bennett's assigned seat. The seats you've booked are 24B and 24C. I'm afraid she is under no obligation to move." "This is ridiculous," Richard sputtered, his face reddening. "I am a Platinum Medallion member. I spend thousands of dollars with this airline every year. Are you telling me my status means nothing? You can't accommodate a simple request for a paying family?" He was puffing out his chest, using his perceived status as a cudgel. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Carlson," Maria said, glancing at his ticket. "However, we cannot force another paying passenger to give up their pre-selected seat. The flight is completely full. There are no other rows available to move you to, and there are no other empty seats to offer Ms. Bennett." The finality in her tone seemed to enrage Richard further. He shot a venomous glare at Olivia. "Fine, we'll sit. But this is the worst customer service I have ever received. I will be filing a formal complaint against this airline and against you personally," he snarled at Maria. He then turned to his wife, Eleanor. "Sit down. Just sit down." Eleanor murmured a quiet, "I'm so sorry," to Olivia, her voice barely a whisper, as she guided their daughter Emily into the middle seat 24B. Richard slumped into the aisle seat 24C with a dramatic, aggrieved sigh, yanking his noise-cancelling headphones from his bag and jamming them over his ears. He pointedly angled his body away from Olivia, creating a wall of hostility. The cabin doors were sealed with a pneumatic hiss, and the safety demonstration began. But for Olivia, the peaceful solitude she had anticipated was shattered. The air in row 24 was thick with resentment. She stared out the window, watching the runway lights blur as the plane began its powerful taxi towards takeoff. The ascent was usually her favorite part, the feeling of leaving the world and its troubles behind. But tonight, she felt a heavy, unwelcome trouble had followed her right on board and was now sitting just inches away, simmering with an ugly, baseless hatred. The aircraft climbed through the bruised twilight sky, puncturing a thick blanket of clouds to reveal a breathtaking panorama of stars against an inky black canvas. Below, the city lights of the eastern seaboard glittered like a scattered handful of diamonds. It was a view that normally filled Olivia with a sense of wonder, a humbling reminder of the vastness of the world. But the beauty was soured by the acrid presence of Richard Carlson festering in the aisle seat. He had made his displeasure a performance. Every movement was exaggerated, the aggressive rustle of his newspaper, the loud "si" as he adjusted his pillow, the way he curtly dismissed the flight attendant, offering him a pre-dinner drink. He was creating a bubble of bitter indignation, and he clearly wanted Olivia to feel its oppressive weight. His wife, Eleanor, sat silently between them, a human buffer in a cold war. She kept her focus entirely on their daughter, Emily, helping her with a coloring book and whispering softly to her, creating a small, separate world of maternal care amidst the palpable tension. Olivia tried to ignore it. She put on her own headphones, selected a calming jazz playlist, and opened her novel. She was a professional at compartmentalizing. In the high-stakes environment of a pediatric cardiac ICU, she had learned to block out distractions to focus entirely on the task at hand, whether it was calculating a complex medication dosage or comforting a terrified parent. She would treat Richard Carlson as she would a faulty beeping monitor just outside her patient's room, an annoyance to be acknowledged and then tuned out. About an hour into the flight, the meal service began. The scent of roasted chicken and pasta filled the cabin. Maria, the flight attendant, approached their row with her trolley. "Dinner this evening, ma'am?" she asked Olivia, with a warm, reassuring smile. "The chicken, please," Olivia said, returning the smile gratefully. As Maria passed the tray over, Richard loudly pulled off his headphones. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you a doctor?" The question was so out of left field, so jarringly personal, that it took Olivia a moment to process. It wasn't asked with curiosity, but with the tone of an interrogator trying to poke holes in a testimony. She looked at him, her expression neutral. "No," she said simply. A smug, triumphant smirk spread across his face. "I thought not," he said loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. He turned to Maria. "See, this is the problem. People are seated in premium sections where they clearly don't belong. This section is for frequent flyers, business professionals, doctors." He gestured vaguely at himself, as if his own presence was proof of his assertion. The racism was no longer veiled. It was stripped bare, ugly and loud. He was publicly equating her race with a lack of professional or financial status. He was implying she couldn't possibly have earned or afforded her seat. A wave of hot fury washed over Olivia, but she pushed it down, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an emotional outburst. "Sir, I am a pediatric cardiac nurse," she stated, her voice dangerously quiet, but clear as a bell. "I work in the intensive care unit at one of the top hospitals in the country, and I bought my ticket with my own money. My profession and my finances are quite frankly none of your business." Eleanor flinched beside him, her head sinking lower. "Richard, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Stop it!" But Richard was on a roll, fueled by his own arrogance. "A nurse," he scoffed, drawing out the word, as if it were an insult. "So you change bedpans and fluff pillows, and you think that entitles you to a seat that a man like me, a senior partner at a private equity firm, has to share. It's a matter of principle. There used to be a certain standard. The insult to her profession was in some ways even more infuriating than the personal racist jab. He had casually dismissed her life's work, the grueling 12-hour shifts, the years of advanced education, the life-and-death decisions she made on a daily basis. He had reduced her to a demeaning stereotype. Before Olivia could respond, Maria intervened, her voice firm and unwavering. "Mr. Carlson, that is completely inappropriate. You are creating a disturbance and insulting another passenger. I need you to stop this immediately, or I will be forced to report this incident to the captain. Harassment of fellow passengers or crew is not tolerated on this aircraft." Several other passengers were now openly staring. A man in the row behind leaned forward. "Hey, buddy, leave the lady alone. You're being a real jerk." Richard's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He was a man clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by women he considered his inferiors. He shot a hateful glare first at Maria, then at the passenger behind him, and finally at Olivia. He opened his mouth as if to retort, but the sight of Maria's hand hovering over the intercom phone on her trolley seemed to make him reconsider. He snatched his meal tray from Maria without a word of thanks and slammed it down on his tray table. He put his headphones back on, cranking the volume so high that the tinny beat of a rock song was audible even from a few feet away. The argument was over, but the atmosphere was now poisoned. Olivia picked at her chicken, her appetite gone. The injustice of it all churned in her stomach. It wasn't just the humiliation, but the sheer exhaustion of it. The constant need to be poised to be twice as good, to never show anger, lest she be labeled the angry black woman. She had to absorb the poison and carry on, all while a man like Richard Carlson could spew it freely with no immediate consequence other than a mild public scolding. She glanced at the little girl, Emily, in the seat between them. The child had her own set of tiny headphones on, watching an animated movie on the seatback screen, seemingly oblivious to her father's toxic behavior. She had a small, intermittent cough, a dry little hack that punctuated the drone of the engines. Eleanor would murmur to her, offering her a sip of water from a bottle. It was a common cabin cough, the kind that came from the dry, recycled air. Olivia, the nurse, in her ever-vigilant, made a mental note of it, but thought little of it at the time. She closed her eyes, trying to find her center, to reclaim the peace he had stolen from her. She focused on her breathing, the techniques she used to manage stress during a chaotic code blue. In, out. In, out. She would not let this man ruin her trip. She would rise above it. She had to. But as the plane sped through the darkness 35,000 feet above the ocean, she couldn't shake the feeling that the night was far from over. The arrogance that radiated from seat 24C felt like a storm cloud gathering in the confined space of the cabin, and she feared what might happen when the turbulence truly began. As the flight droned on into its third hour, a fragile truce settled over row 24. Richard Carlson, having lost his public battle, retreated into a sullen silence. He watched a movie on his laptop, with a fierce, unwavering concentration, creating an invisible but palpable barrier around himself. Olivia, equally determined to reclaim her space, managed to lose herself in her book. The world of fictional characters and intricate plots was a welcome escape from the cramped, hostile reality of her surroundings. Yet a part of her clinical awareness remained active, a background program that was always running. It was a professional habit she couldn't switch off. She noticed the slight tremor in Eleanor's hands as she helped her daughter with a snack. She observed the pale, almost translucent quality of Emily's skin under the dim cabin lighting. and she paid particular attention to the child's cough. It was no longer the occasional dry hack it had been earlier. It was becoming more frequent, a persistent tickling cough that sounded wet and congested. After one particularly pronounced coughing fit, Emily whimpered, "My tummy hurts, Mummy." Eleanor's face, already etched with worry from her husband's behavior, tightened with a new, more primal anxiety. She felt Emily's forehead with the back of her hand. "You don't feel warm," she murmured, more to reassure herself than the child. She rummaged through her large tote bag and produced a child-friendly pain reliever, which she managed to get Emily to swallow with some apple juice. Olivia watched from the corner of her eye, her nurse's instincts on high alert. A stomachache and a worsening cough in a young child could be anything from a simple virus to something more serious. The cabin pressure and dry air could exacerbate pre-existing conditions. She debated whether to say something. Offering unsolicited medical advice was a minefield, especially given the hostility from the child's father. He would likely see it as an intrusion, another attempt to assert herself. He might even accuse her of trying to cause trouble. So she remained quiet, a silent observer, hoping it was nothing. Half an hour passed. Emily grew listless. The glow from her movie screen no longer held her attention. She leaned her head against her mother's arm, her breathing growing shallow and rapid. Her small face was flushed, and a sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead. The coughs were now coming in rattling spasms that shook her small frame. Eleanor's quiet reassurances grew more frantic. "Just try to rest, sweetie. We'll be in London soon. Maybe a little nap will help." She draped a thin airline blanket over the child, but Emily pushed it away, whining fretfully. Richard finally noticed. He pulled one side of his headphones off. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, his tone laced with impatience rather than concern. It was as if his daughter's illness was an inconvenience specifically designed to annoy him. "She doesn't feel well," Eleanor whispered, her voice strained. "Her cough is worse, and she says her stomach hurts. I gave her some medicine, but it's not helping." "She was fine this morning," Richard grumbled, as if accusing his wife of mismanagement. He briefly placed a hand on Emily's head. "She's burning up." The impatience in his voice was now tinged with a flicker of genuine alarm. "Did you pack the thermometer?" Eleanor nodded, her hands shaking as she fumbled in her bag again. The entire dynamic was on display for Olivia, a domineering, dismissive husband, and a nervous, placating wife caught together in a moment of parental fear. Olivia's internal debate was over. The child's symptoms were escalating too quickly. Tachypnea, the rapid breathing, was a significant red flag. This was no longer about courtesy or avoiding confrontation. This was about a sick child. She leaned over slightly, keeping her voice calm and non-threatening, directing her words to Eleanor. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I don't mean to intrude, but I am a pediatric nurse. Your daughter's breathing seems quite rapid. Has she had any history of asthma or respiratory issues?" Eleanor looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. For a moment she seemed ready to accept the offer of help, but then Richard's head snapped around. "We don't need your help," he snarled, his voice a low, menacing growl. He positioned his body to physically block Olivia's view of his wife and child. "She's our daughter. We can handle it. Stay out of our family business." The venom in his voice was shocking. Even in the face of his child's worsening condition, his pride and prejudice were his primary drivers. He would rather his daughter suffer than accept help from a woman he had already deemed beneath him. Olivia recoiled not in fear, but in stunned disbelief. "Sir, I'm not trying to interfere. I'm genuinely concerned. Rapid breathing in a child can be a serious symptom, especially at this altitude." "I said we've got it," he hissed. "Mind your own business. We don't need some nurse giving her 2 cents. He practically spat the word nurse at her. The cruelty of his rejection was absolute. He was putting his ego above his daughter's well-being. Olivia felt a profound sense of helplessness. She was a medical professional, ethically bound to help, but she couldn't force her assistance on them. All she could do was sit and watch her heart pounding with a growing sense of dread. She flagged down Maria on her next pass through the cabin. "The little girl in 24B," Olivia said in a low, urgent voice. "She's not doing well. Her breathing is very fast. She has a fever and a productive cough. The father refused my help, but I think you should be aware. You might need to ask if there's a doctor on board soon." Maria's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of grave concern. She glanced over at the family. She could hear the child's labored breaths even from the aisle. "Thank you for letting me know," she whispered back. "I'll keep a close eye. Let me know if anything changes." Olivia nodded her stomach, a knot of anxiety. She sat back in her seat, the words of her novel blurring into meaningless shapes on the page. She was no longer a passenger on a routine flight. She was a nurse off the clock, but on high alert, watching a medical crisis unfold in slow motion, just 2 feet away. The whispers of a mother's worry and the rattling gasps of a sick child were now the only sounds she could hear. The situation deteriorated with terrifying speed. The pain medication had no effect. Emily, who had been listless and whimpering, suddenly began to cry, a weak, panicked wail that was profoundly distressing. Her rapid, shallow breaths turned into desperate, rasping gasps for air. Each inhalation was a struggle, accompanied by a high-pitched wheezing sound. Her skin, which had been flushed, was now taking on a pale grayish pallor, and a bluish tinge was starting to appear around her lips. Olivia recognized the signs instantly. Cyanosis. The child wasn't getting enough oxygen. Her body was starving for it. Every alarm bell in Olivia's head was screaming. This was no longer a minor illness. This was a full-blown medical emergency. Eleanor was frantic. "Richard, do something!" she cried, her voice cracking with terror. "She can't breathe. Look at her. She can't breathe." Richard was frozen in his seat, his arrogance melting away to reveal a raw, stark panic. The man who had been so sure of himself, so in command, was utterly helpless. He stared at his daughter, his face a mask of disbelief and fear. "Emily, sweetheart. What's wrong?" "Daddy's here." His words were hollow, useless platitudes in the face of a physiological crisis. Other passengers were now fully aware of the drama unfolding. Heads turned. A nervous murmur rippled through the cabin. Maria, the flight attendant, came rushing back, her face grim. "What's happening?" she asked, her professional calm barely masking the urgency in her tone. "She can't breathe." Eleanor sobbed, cradling Emily's head. The child's eyes were wide with terror, her small hands clawing weakly at her own throat. Maria immediately reached for the intercom. Her voice rang through the cabin, sharp and clear, cutting through the engine's drone. "Paging for a medical professional. Is there a doctor, nurse, or paramedic on board? We have a medical emergency in row 24, a pediatric medical emergency." The call sent a jolt through the aircraft. For a few seconds there was silence. People looked around, hoping a hero would emerge. Richard Carlson looked around too, his eyes desperately scanning the faces of his fellow passengers, searching for the doctor he felt was worthy of his premium cabin. He was looking for anyone but the woman sitting right beside him. Olivia didn't hesitate. The father's permission was no longer relevant. This was a matter of life and death. The child's life. She unbuckled her seatbelt in one fluid motion. "I'm a pediatric ICU nurse," she announced, her voice resonating with an authority that instantly commanded attention. "Let me see her." She moved past a stunned Eleanor and knelt in the narrow space in front of Emily's seat. Richard jolted out of his stupor, moved to block her again, a reflexive act of his earlier pride. "Wait, who?" Olivia looked up at him, and the gaze she fixed on him was not one of anger or "I told you so." It was the focused, intense, no-nonsense look of a medical professional in crisis mode. It was a look that stripped away all the social nonsense, all the prejudice and ego. It said, "Get out of my way, or this child will die." "Her lips are blue," Olivia said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. "She's in severe respiratory distress. We don't have time for this. I need you to give me space to work. Now." The command was so absolute, so powerful, that Richard simply crumbled. All the fight went out of him. He stumbled back into his seat, his face ashen, suddenly looking small and utterly powerless. Maria was already there with the aircraft's primary medical kit. "What do you need?" she asked, her training kicking in. "A stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff for a pediatric patient, and an oxygen tank with a pediatric mask." "Right now," Olivia ordered, already pressing 2 fingers against Emily's neck to check her pulse. It was thready and terrifyingly fast. She listened to the child's chest with her naked ear. The wheezing was pronounced. Her lungs were constricted, fighting a losing battle to draw in air. "Eleanor," Olivia said, her voice softening slightly as she addressed the mother. "What is her medical history? Any allergies? Any recent illnesses? I need to know everything." Eleanor, sobbing but seemingly grateful to have concrete questions to answer, choked out the information. "No allergies that we know of. She had a cold last week, just a sniffle. The doctor said it was viral. No history of asthma. She's never had anything like this before." Okay, Olivia said, processing the information. Viral infection leading to acute respiratory distress. Could be severe bronchiolitis or perhaps a sudden severe allergic reaction to something. Anaphylaxis. Unlikely without a known allergen, but possible. Another flight attendant arrived with a larger, more comprehensive medical kit and a portable oxygen cylinder. Olivia ripped open the packaging for a pediatric oxygen mask and fitted it over Emily's small face, turning the dial on the tank to deliver high-flow oxygen. "I need you to clear the aisle," Olivia called out to Maria. "We might need to lay her down flat." She took the small stethoscope from the kit and listened intently to Emily's chest. The sounds she heard confirmed her worst fears. Severely diminished air entry on both sides, coupled with the loud, high-pitched wheezing of bronchospasm. Her airways were clamping shut. "We need to contact MedLink," Olivia told Maria, referring to the ground-based medical support service for airlines. "Tell them we have a probable status asthmaticus or severe anaphylactic reaction in a 6-year-old female. She is cyanotic and in severe respiratory distress. I need an order for epinephrine. Do you have an EpiPen in your kit? A pediatric dose." Maria's eyes widened. "Yes, we do." "Get it," Olivia commanded. "We may not have time to wait for the call." The gravity of the situation was sinking in for everyone around them. The casual annoyance of a long flight had evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of watching a child fight for her life. And at the center of it all was Olivia Bennett, the woman who had been scorned and dismissed, now the sole authority in a life-or-death crisis at 35,000 feet, holding the fate of Richard Carlson's daughter in her hands. The cabin of the Boeing 777, once a space of mundane travel, had transformed into a makeshift emergency room. The normal sounds of the flight, the hum of the engines, the quiet chatter of passengers were replaced by the sharp hiss of the oxygen tank. Eleanor Carlson's stifled sobs and Olivia Bennett's calm, authoritative voice. Richard Carlson sat paralyzed in his seat, a spectator to the most terrifying event of his life. The world had inverted. The woman he had tried to publicly humiliate, the nurse he had derided as little more than a menial laborer, was now a figure of immense power and knowledge. Her every word was a command, her every action precise and critical. He watched her hands, strong, steady, and gentle, as she adjusted the oxygen mask on his daughter's face, checked her pulse again, and prepared for the next crucial step. He had built his life on a hierarchy of worth, placing himself at the very top. In this moment, that entire structure had been demolished. He was at the bottom, a helpless, terrified father, utterly dependent on the grace and skill of a woman he had shown none. Maria returned with the emergency medical kit and handed Olivia a yellow and orange box containing a pediatric EpiPen. "Medlink is on the line with the captain," she reported breathlessly. "He's patching them through to the cabin phone." "There's no time," Olivia said, her eyes fixed on Emily. The child's struggles for breath were weakening a sign of exhaustion. Her oxygen-starved body was beginning to shut down. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping, I can see it. We need to administer the epinephrine now. It will open her airways." Making the decision to administer a powerful drug like epinephrine without a direct real-time order from a physician was a significant risk. On the ground in her hospital, there were protocols and doctors just a shout away. Here she was on her own. But the protocol for a life-threatening anaphylactic or asthma attack was clear, and Emily was ticking every box. To wait would be to risk respiratory arrest. It was a calculated professional judgment call. "Eleanor," Olivia said, her voice firm but kind, pulling the mother's attention. "I need to give your daughter an injection of epinephrine. It's adrenaline. It will help her breathe, but it will make her heart race and she might shake. It's the standard treatment for this. Do I have your consent?" Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but she nodded vigorously. "Yes. Yes, please do anything. Save her." Olivia didn't even glance at Richard. His consent was irrelevant. She had the mother's. With practiced efficiency, she pulled the cap off the EpiPen, instructed another flight attendant to hold Emily's leg still, and said, "Okay, Emily, a little pinch." She pressed the device firmly against the child's outer thigh. There was a sharp click as the spring-loaded needle deployed, delivering the life-saving medication deep into the muscle. For a few agonizingly long seconds, nothing happened. Emily's breathing was still a desperate, ragged wheeze. The silence in the cabin was absolute, a collective holding of breath. Richard let out a choked guttural sound, a mix between a sob and a gasp. And then it began to work. The change was subtle at first, then dramatic. The high-pitched wheezing sound from Emily's chest began to lessen. Her frantic gasps for air became deeper, more productive. A small, faint flush of pink started to creep back into her cheeks, chasing away the terrifying grayness. Her eyelids, which had been fluttering, opened, and her eyes, though still filled with fear, seemed more focused. A wave of palpable relief washed over the surrounding passengers. Someone let out a shaky sigh. Maria whispered, "Oh, thank God." Olivia pressed the stethoscope to Emily's chest again. "Air entry is improving," she announced, her voice still all business. "The bronchospasm is resolving. The epinephrine is working." She kept the oxygen mask firmly in place. She's not out of the woods. This can rebound. We need to monitor her very closely. Just then, Maria handed Olivia the cabin phone. It's the Medlink doctor. Olivia took the receiver. This is Olivia Bennett, RN BSN, from the pediatric cardiac ICU at Johns Hopkins. She stated her credentials rolling off her tongue with the weight of years of experience. I am with a 6-year-old female patient experiencing a severe anaphylactic or asthmatic event. I have administered one 0.15 mg dose of epinephrine intramuscularly due to severe respiratory distress and cyanosis. Patient is responding positively to treatment. Airway is currently patent. She is on high-flow oxygen. Vital signs are... She proceeded to give a concise professional report to the doctor on the other end of the line using precise medical terminology that flew completely over Richard's head. He listened mesmerized and ashamed. The language she spoke was one of healing, of science, of profound competence. He had mocked her profession, and here she was operating at a level of expertise he couldn't begin to comprehend. He thought of his own work of spreadsheets and mergers of hostile takeovers and profit margins. It all seemed so meaningless, so trivial in the face of this raw, visceral fight for a single breath of air. Olivia finished the call. The doctor concurs with the treatment. He's recommending we divert. She turned to Maria. The captain needs to know. We need to land at the nearest suitable airport. Gander, Newfoundland is probably our best option. This child needs to be in a hospital. Maria nodded and hurried toward the cockpit. The immediate crisis had passed, but Olivia's work was not done. She stayed with Emily, continuously monitoring her breathing and pulse. She spoke to her in a soft, soothing voice, the same one she used for countless sick children in her care. You're doing so great, sweetie. Just keep taking those nice, deep breaths for me. You're being so brave. Emily, calmer now, looked up at Olivia, her big, fearful eyes filled with a child's simple trust. She didn't see a black woman or a white woman. She saw the person who had made the scary feeling go away, the person who had helped her breathe again. Eleanor was weeping silently, her hand clutching Olivia's arm. Thank you, she mouthed over and over again. Thank you, thank you. Olivia gave her a brief, compassionate squeeze on the shoulder. We're not there yet. Let's get her safely on the ground. And Richard Carlson watched it all. He watched his wife and daughter find comfort and safety in the hands of the woman he had treated with such contempt. The universe had held up a mirror to his soul, and the reflection was grotesque. He had been so proud, so arrogant, so certain of his place in the world. And in the space of 30 minutes, a black nurse and his own daughter's fragile lungs had taught him a lesson in humility, so brutal and so complete that he knew with sickening certainty he would never be the same. The captain's voice soon came over the intercom, calm and measured, but with an underlying seriousness that silenced the entire plane. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a medical emergency on board, we will be diverting our flight to Gander International Airport in Newfoundland. Medical personnel will be meeting the aircraft upon arrival. We anticipate being on the ground in approximately 45 minutes. We appreciate your understanding. A quiet murmur of assent went through the cabin. No one complained about the delay or the change of plans. They had all been witnesses to the crisis, united by the shared experience of vicarious fear and profound relief. They were no longer just a plain load of strangers. They were a community that had rallied around one of its smallest members. For the next 45 minutes, Olivia Bennett did not leave Emily's side. She maintained a constant vigil, charting the child's vital signs on a napkin from the drinks trolley. She counted her respiratory rate, felt for the strength of her pulse, and watched the color of her skin. The epinephrine had worked its magic, but it was a temporary fix. The underlying inflammation that had caused the attack could return with a vengeance once the adrenaline wore off. Emily had stabilized into a fragile state of calm. The oxygen mask fogged with each of her now steady breaths. She was exhausted, but awake, her hand clutching her mother's. Eleanor had not let go of Olivia's arm, as if the nurse were a physical anchor in the storm of her emotions. She kept whispering her thanks, her gratitude, a raw, desperate prayer. The most profound change, however, was in the man in seat 24C. Richard Carlson was utterly broken. The swaggering, entitled private equity partner had vanished, replaced by a ghost. He sat hunched over his hands, clasped between his knees, his head bowed. He stared at the floor, at his expensive leather shoes, as if they were the most fascinating objects in the world, unable to meet anyone's eyes. He was trapped in a vortex of shame. Every cruel word he had spoken to Olivia replayed in his mind, each one a fresh lash of self-loathing. "I believe you're in our seats. You could probably find a more suitable seat elsewhere. A nurse. So you change bedpans and fluff pillows." He had not just been wrong. He had been monstrous. He had dehumanized a woman who, it turned out, held the very life of his child in her expert hands. The karma was so direct, so cruelly perfect, it was almost poetic. He had demanded her seat, and she had ended up saving the person who was meant to sit beside him. He had questioned her profession, and that very profession had become his salvation. He had judged her by the color of her skin, and that skin contained a person of more character, grace, and skill than he could ever hope to possess. It wasn't just that he owed her an apology. He felt he owed her his entire world. How do you thank someone for giving you back your daughter? How do you atone for treating your savior like dirt? As the plane began its final descent into Gander, the landscape below was a dark, rugged patchwork of forests and lakes, a stark contrast to the urban sprawl they had left behind. The flaps engaged with a heavy thud, and the plane banked its landing lights, cutting through the Canadian night. Olivia was giving Eleanor instructions. "When the paramedics come on board, you need to tell them exactly what happened. Tell them she had a presumed viral illness, then developed acute respiratory distress. Tell them she received one 0.15 milligram dose of intramuscular epinephrine at approximately 2240 UTC with a positive response. Can you remember that?" Eleanor nodded, repeating the words like a mantra. Epinephrine. 0.15 milligrams. Positive response. "Good," Olivia said. "They'll take it from there. She'll be in good hands." The plane touched down with a gentle bump, the reverse thrusters roaring to life. It taxied quickly towards a waiting gate, where an ambulance and several emergency vehicles were parked on the tarmac, their lights flashing in the darkness. As the seatbelt sign pinged off, a team of uniformed Canadian paramedics was already waiting at the door. They came on board quickly, their movements efficient and purposeful. Maria led them directly to row 24. "This is the patient," she said, gesturing to Emily, "and this is the nurse who's been caring for her." The lead paramedic, a burly man with a kind face, looked at Olivia with professional respect. "Ma'am, can you give me a report?" Olivia stood up, finally relinquishing her post, and gave a swift, concise handover, detailing the timeline of symptoms, the intervention, and Emily's response. The paramedics listened intently, nodding. They were speaking the same language. As they began to gently move Emily onto a portable stretcher, Richard finally stirred. He stood up, his movements stiff and awkward. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at Olivia, his mouth opening and closing silently for a moment, unable to form words. Finally, he spoke his voice, a hoarse, broken whisper that was barely audible over the sounds of the paramedics. I don't know what to say." Olivia met his gaze. Her expression wasn't triumphant or smug. It was just tired. She had been running on adrenaline, and now, with the immediate danger past, a deep weariness was setting in. "There's nothing you need to say to me right now," she said, her voice flat. "Your focus should be on your daughter." "No," he insisted, taking a hesitant step towards her. The aisle was crowded, but it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "I have to. What I did, how I treated you, it was unforgivable." The admission seemed to cost him a great deal, a painful tearing down of his ego. "You saved her life, my Emily. You saved her life after I—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He just shook his head, a look of profound, gut-wrenching shame on his face. "Thank you," he choked out. The words were small, inadequate, but they were all he had. "Thank you." Olivia simply nodded. She accepted his gratitude not for his sake, but because it was her due. She had done her job. She had saved a child. That was the beginning and the end of it. The paramedics began moving Emily down the aisle. Eleanor followed closely behind her hand, resting on her daughter's leg. Before she disappeared through the door, she turned back and looked at Olivia, her eyes conveying a depth of gratitude that no words could ever capture. Richard stood there for a moment longer, lost and untethered. Then he turned to follow his family off the plane and into the uncertain night. The rest of the passengers disembarked slowly, their journey to London, unexpectedly interrupted. They would be put up in hotels for the night. As Olivia gathered her belongings, several people stopped to pat her on the shoulder or murmur their admiration. "You were incredible," said one woman. "Truly a hero," said another. Olivia accepted their praise with a polite, tired smile. She wasn't a hero. She was a nurse. Tonight, her work had just happened to be in a very public venue. She was one of the last to leave the plane. Maria, the flight attendant, was waiting for her on the jet bridge. "Miss Bennett," Maria said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "On behalf of our entire crew, thank you. I've been flying for 15 years and I've never seen anything like that. Your composure, your skill, it was breathtaking." "I was just doing my job," Olivia replied, the familiar refrain feeling more true than ever. "The airline is of course covering your hotel and meals," Maria continued, "and our station manager wants to speak with you. We've already upgraded you to first class for the remainder of your journey tomorrow, but honestly that feels so ridiculously inadequate." Olivia was exhausted, but she followed Maria into the small, quiet airport terminal of Gander. The station manager, a friendly man named Frank, reiterated his thanks and handed her a voucher for a hotel. As he was speaking, Olivia saw a familiar figure standing hesitantly by the customs area, Richard Carlson. He had evidently waited for her. His wife and daughter were gone, presumably on their way to the hospital. He approached her cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal he had previously wounded. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions: shame, gratitude, and a desperate need for something he couldn't quite name. Absolution, perhaps. "Miss Bennett," he began, his voice still raspy. "I know you said I didn't need to say anything, but I do." Olivia sighed, bracing herself. "Mr. Carlson." "Please," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "Just let me say this. I need to say this. There is no excuse for my behavior. None. It was racist, it was arrogant, it was vile. I saw you and I made a judgment based on nothing but my own ugly prejudice. It's a sickness in me that I didn't even fully see until tonight." He looked her directly in the eye, and for the first time she saw not a bully, but a man utterly stripped of his defenses. "You didn't just save my daughter's life," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved mine. You showed me what a complete and utter fool I've been. What a monster I've been. I look at my daughter and I think about the world I'm raising her in the person I'm teaching her to be. And I'm horrified. Horrified by myself." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "This is my personal number. I want to pay for your entire trip. I want to make a substantial donation to your hospital, to your department in your name. Anything. Please just tell me what I can do to even begin to make this right." Olivia looked at the card but didn't take it. The offer of money, while likely sincere, felt transactional, a way for him to assuage his guilt with the tool he understood best, wealth. It was too easy. "Mr. Carlson," she said, her voice measured, "I don't want your money. My trip is paid for. And if you want to donate to Johns Hopkins, you should do it because you believe in the work they do. Not to pay me back." His face fell. He looked utterly lost. "Then what? What can I do?" This was the moment. This was the point where true karma, the kind that teaches and transforms rather than just punishes, could be delivered. It wasn't about revenge or seeing him suffer. It was about making the lesson stick, about forging a connection where there had only been a hateful divide. An idea startling in its clarity came to her. It was a long shot, a twist of fate she had been contemplating ever since she'd first heard his name and profession. "You said you're a senior partner at a private equity firm," she stated. "Yes," he confirmed, looking confused. "Oakwood Capital Partners in New York." Olivia took a deep breath. "My brother Michael Bennett is a lawyer, an incredibly talented one. For the last 2 years, he and a small team of pro bono lawyers have been fighting a case against a property development group that is trying to shut down a community health clinic in a low-income neighborhood in Baltimore. That clinic provides essential care, prenatal, pediatric, geriatric, to thousands of people who can't afford to go anywhere else. It's a lifeline." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "The development group trying to tear it down to build luxury condos. They're funded by Oakwood Capital Partners." The color drained from Richard Carlson's face. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. The world, which had already been spinning, tilted on its axis. The abstract numbers on his firm's balance sheets, the remote urban renewal projects he approved from his corner office, were suddenly connected to this woman, to this moment, in the most intimate and devastating way possible. His company was actively working to destroy a resource that provided the same kind of essential care to children that his own daughter had just so desperately needed. "The clinic," he stammered, his mind racing. "The Baltimore project. I signed off on that. I pushed for it." "I know," Olivia said quietly. The hard karma had landed. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating click of pieces falling into place. Richard stared at her, his mouth agape. The full scope of his hypocrisy was laid bare. He had sneered at her for being a nurse, while his own firm was trying to bulldoze a clinic full of them. He had demanded a seat in a premium cabin, while actively working to take away basic health care from people who could never dream of affording such a luxury. He finally understood. An apology was nothing. Money was nothing. This was the penance. This was the path to something resembling redemption. "I will stop it," he said, his voice imbued with a new desperate conviction. "I will call my office first thing in the morning. I will personally fly to Baltimore. I will reverse the decision. I will make sure that the clinic gets new funding. I will make it my personal mission. I swear to you, Miss Bennett. I swear on my daughter's life." Olivia watched him, her gaze unwavering. She saw the change in him, the cracking of a man's soul, and the painful, difficult birth of a better one. She finally reached out and took his business card. "I'll have my brother call your office on Monday," she said. She then turned and walked toward the exit to find the shuttle to her hotel. Leaving Richard Carlson standing alone in the middle of the Gander airport, a man irrevocably altered by a crisis at 35,000 feet, and the quiet, unyielding grace of the woman he had so terribly wronged. He had boarded the plane a man of privilege and prejudice. He would leave a man burdened by a debt that would take a lifetime to repay. This was more than just a mid-air drama. It was a powerful, real-life collision of prejudice and professionalism, of arrogance and expertise. Olivia Bennett didn't just save a child's life. She held up a mirror to a man's poisoned soul and forced him to see the reflection. The story's incredible twist serves as a stark reminder that our actions, big and small, are interconnected in ways we can't possibly imagine. The contempt we show a stranger could be the very person our life, or the life of someone we love, depends on. If this story moved you and made you think about the power of compassion and the unexpected ways karma can manifest, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with others so this important message can spread. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories that explore the depths of human nature. Thank you for listening.